Welcome, guys. I'm glad you like the song. It's just it's just the Zenless Zone Zero soundtrack. This track is called Hollow Tour Service Theme, and I have no idea when it plays. It's from a couple patches ago, probably a limited time event. I like it too. August is still switching devices, so we'll get started shortly. In the meantime, no, it's not Layton. What is Layton? Is that a game? Or is that, I don't know, a horn player? Today we're going to be going over sexing the body.
I'm still switching. Your mic sounds like it's peaking just a little bit for me.
I don't think well, actually it is supposed to be.
Like your voice sounds a little bit tinny when you speak louder. Here, I'll swap to my computer and see if it still sounds
Okay,
better.
I'll move my mic a little bit farther away. I was like speaking right into it.
Okay, here we are.
There we go. There's the August I know and love. The real one.
Okay, how do I sound?
Much better. A lot quieter, though. I might have to turn you up. Yes.
Yeah.
I usually have to put you up to 200%.
Yeah, that's so annoying.
Mm-hmm.
I have my microphone boosted all the way. I don't know why. I mean, I can speak louder, but I don't think I should be speaking that loud. And even if I speak, like, directly into the mic, I don't know. How does this sound?
I have to turn you down a bit if you do that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. It's a little bit uncomfortable for me, so I probably will not do that for now.
Oh my god, Captain Jumpy said he spent $120 on books.
Oh my god.
Good day. That is a good day.
What's in the hall?
Yeah, I'm curious too.
Let's hear it.
What are we reading? Yeah, let me pull up the Google. Oh yeah, I don't even have to make it too much smaller. Let me expand it a bit and zoom in. There we go.
So, today, do you want to jump into what we're doing today? Or you want me to... Okay, go ahead,
Okay.
yeah.
Today we're going over Sexing the Body. We had a reading group on it a little while ago. It just finished 2 weeks ago. It's about, it's kind of like a genealogy of the way that we've assigned sex to bodies, of course. Based on, like, social factors, then hormones, genetics, the brain also. And it's about kind of breaking down this sort of, like, the idea that we're objectively assigning these things, or that we're doing so without social influence. It's kind of related to the sex equals gender argument that Judith Butler makes in Gender Trouble, except Fausto-Sterling never makes this argument explicit. It's just that she says that sex is socially determined. That's one of her theses. Or theses?
Yeah. It's sort of an understanding of the genealogy of the understanding of gender, as Richard mentioned. And so part of that is understanding not just the cultural and political forces, but also the ways that dominant medical and scientific practice determine these things, right? Like,
right.
You can't have a gendering system. Here, sex is the gendering happening, as we were mentioning, with the sex equals gender of Butler, or sex is a type of gendering. You can't have a gendering along chromosomal lines or hormonal lines if those are not things that are being studied and given primacy, right?
Yes.
Ooh, Captain Jumpy says, I got the gay science, the ticklish subject, the need for roots, poetics of space, living currency, and there is no such thing as cultural identity. Wow, that is a great haul.
the ticklish subject? What the fuck is that?
Yep, that's Zizek. That's good Zizek.
Good Zizek. Interesting.
Theses.
Is it about tickling?
Did I say theses?
No, I said theses.
Ah, yeah.
And then I was like, I'm saying hippopotamuses. Like,
Hippopotamuses
Surely-
is correct, though.
no, Shirley Temple goes like hippopotamuses.
I thought
No
hippopotamus.
rhinoceroses. I only want hippopotamuses.
True.
Yeah, she messes it up adorably. Anyway, so this book has how many chapters? Let me count.
Yeah. Hippopotamuses is the proper plural. Hippopotami is considered acceptable.
Oh, I see. Oh, it's like that distinction that Raz was making. It's acceptable, but it's not morally good.
True. Yeah. It's like cactuses and cacti, where cactuses is like historically preferable in terms of like etymologically.
Oh, I thought it was
But it sounds
cacti.
wrong.
But I say.
Well, yeah.
Actually,
There's several of them that are like that, where the Greco-Roman. I think this. Wait, I think that's. I can't remember if it's Greek.
I know
or
octopus is correct because octo is Greek.
Right. Yeah. It's the Greek words. Thank you.
Yeah, and the Roman has the I. Like
yeah.
Pegasi.
But both are considered correct within common speech, so it's not a big issue.
Yeah. Because English is a language of anarchy.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going over Anne Fausto-Sterling's Sexing the Body and sort of summarizing it. Especially the first and last chapters, which are the setup and conclusion. All the middle chapters contain a lot of very important and interesting documentation and exposition of this medicalization and the genealogy of it, of sexing, of determining sex. And by determining, as we'll get into, it's not just determining as whether it fits into the binary, but actually determining as in creating a binary through their determinations.
Mm-hmm. The thing is that the binary already exists in our social world. For example, as we'll get into the, there are some old, like, ancient Greek conceptions of medicine that were based on 3 sexes, or maybe even like 5 sexes. Or was it like 7, depending on the different chambers of the body? There's like 6 on the left, 6 on the right, and 1 in the middle.
Yeah, I think it was 6 or 7, something like that. Yeah.
August, you can't do that.
10 people just left.
Yeah, it deserved.
Okay.
Okay.
Shall we get started?
Yes. All right. We kind of have gotten started.
Fair enough.
So there's 9 chapters. I want to talk about the structure a little bit. There's 9 chapters. The first one and the last one, Dueling Dualisms and Gender Systems Towards the Theory of Human Sexuality, are sort of like summary chapters. They talk about the overall structure and contents of the book. And
theses,
the different goals, yes, that Anne Fausto-Sterling has throughout the book. I want to go over these 2 chapters and how they mirror each other, how they parallel each other. But we'll get there after we talk about the other ones in brief. Dueling Dualisms is mainly about the the false dichotomy between sex and gender, physical/nature, and social/cultural. male and female, and essentialism and constructionism. Then, gender systems towards the theory of human sexuality is about how Fausto-Sterling wants to apply systems theory to how we understand sexuality. And August, do you have a good explanation of what systems theory is? I don't really have one off the top of my head.
We got Titan saying it's theses, not theses. I just looked it up. It's theses. So take that.
The ship of Theseus.
The ship of Theses. Yeah, so systems theory is a pretty broad, general way of, especially in the sciences, incorporating more complex causalities into the understanding of emergent properties. So
yeah, it's looking at things at multiple levels of emergence.
Right, and how those levels are sort of interconnected. There's several different kinds of system theory. I'm not super familiar with any of them, but they often get applied to specific fields. So like there's systems theories in something like what's the term? Not biology. I mean there is in biology as well. Okay, I have to say, the shit of feces. That's really good.
Yeah, that made me chuckle.
But in something like God, what's it called when you study the environment?
Ecology?
Ecology. Yeah, ecological study often uses different types of systems theories. But it's basically the idea
the organism versus the ecosystem. The cell.
Irreducible complexity of natural systems, especially, that cannot be broken down to smaller parts without losing information.
Yeah.
Or network theories. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap with certain strains of philosophical thought.
Mm-hmm. Though she doesn't cite a lot of philosophers at the end. It's more, she does so more in dualisms.
Yeah.
Hello, Imran.
Yeah, I want to give a quick example for people who are a little bit lost about what August is talking about. Because August is talking, not incorrectly, but he is talking at a very high level of like definition. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds all right.
Yeah, very quickly. So a very practical example of something like systems theory, I suppose, would be an example of, so August gave an example of irreducibility between something and its environment. A good way of thinking about this is maybe thinking about it at the level of social life. So something like as pertaining to sociology. An example of this would be how sociology used to be kind of conducted. Back then, you had what they called methodological individualists. And all that meant was that their notion of society was that society was composed out of the kind of internal drives and dispositions of individual people. In other words, society could be considered as a kind of adding up of every individual person, a kind of 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 way of thinking.
Yeah. And think of Thatcher. There's no such thing as society, just a collection of individuals. Same thing.
Yeah, I think she even said families. But more or less something like this, where the idea is that the cultural system of values of a society is downstream of individual, usually internal, biological, genetic, whatever, propensities at the individual level. Now, what does August mean when he says something like, we were talking about irreducible complexity, where we can't simply reduce things without information loss? That if you begin with a notion of, say, for example, the individual, you lose the way in which that individual is already constituted by their relationships within society as such. And this would be something like an information loss. If I can conceive as society as beginning from this kind of molar unit of the individual, of this kind of initium of society, this kind of singular being, and that is a starting point, when we work upwards, almost like we're talking about quarks, right, or something like this in science. The problem is I'm not realizing how much the social constitutes their understanding of, like, their individuated self already. So an example of this would be something like, anthropologists are already very hip to this, by the way. An example of this would be something like the lineage, right? The fact that you're the result of quite literally a genetic lineage. So this impacts how you are in a literal kind of, in the way of your being, right? In an ontological way, or in an ontic way. You also have within a society the notion of otherness that is needed to constitute a notion of oneness in the first place. So the idea of
I think we're getting a little off track in terms of sexing the body. I don't know that.
Oh, sorry. I just want to hammer in the point that that systems theories are predicated upon the irreducibility of I don't want to say irreducibility, but they're predicated upon the inability to extricate a singular unit from its relationships. That's always what it's like. The fundamental basis is that your relationships are constitutive of what you are at the most fundamental level, rather than we just begin with this kind of individual unit.
You cannot separate a node from a network is sort of the most basic.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We have things like cybernetics, for example, that's focused on what they call feedback loops, which is their own way of trying to think about this kind of fundamentality of the relationship. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I just wanted to add in that practical way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I selected some interesting moments in dualisms that we could go over.
Go ahead.
Yes. So firstly, let me read a bit from... Whoa! Shoot, my cat just jumped onto my table and almost knocked a bunch of shit over. Excuse me. Okay. One of the major claims that I make in this book is that labeling someone, a man or a woman, is a social decision. We may use scientific knowledge to help us make the decision, but only our beliefs about gender, not science, can define our sex. Furthermore, our beliefs about
can you show
gender...
that on stream, by the way?
Oh, yes. Good idea. This is page 3. Yes, down here.
Perfect.
My cat is crawling all over my desk begging for a quesadilla. Yeah, I would too if I was a cat. Quesadilla's good. Over the last few decades, the relation between social expressions of masculinity and femininity and their physical underpinnings has been hotly debated in scientific and social arenas. In 1972, the sexologists John Lenny and Anke Erdhart popularized the idea that sex and gender are separate categories. Sex, they argued, refers to physical attributes. It is anatomically and physiologically determined, meaning it's unchangeable. Gender they saw as a psychological transformation of the self, the internal conviction that one is either male or female, gender identity, and the behavioral expressions of that conviction. This, more recently, we also see as unchangeable. Like, you, for example, if you're a trans masked person, or trans man, you're seen as always being a man from when you were born to the end of your life after you've transitioned. It's not that you were once a girl and then you became a man. Okay. Meanwhile, the second-wave feminists of the 1970s also argued that sex is distinct from gender. The social institutions themselves designed to perpetuate gender inequality produced most of the differences between men and women. So it's interesting that feminists and John Money agree on something so, like, fundamental.
Yeah, I mean, John Money and his experiments with gender, sex change related stuff was relatively influential in like queer rights advocacy. This idea of we went over a lot of money stuff, and we'll get to it, I guess, maybe later in the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Money was the one where they had the child who they tried to, like, forcibly socially transition, right?
Yes.
And this shaped the sort of Born This Way narrative around a lot of, like, transgender related conversations. Has basically been similar since Money.
Yes.
So it's not that surprising.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's also this note here of sex differences versus gender differences. Sex differences are unchangeable, but gender differences are not. This is kind of interesting because with our technology today, it's pretty easy to change somebody's, or like to resolve a sex difference. Like, you can administer testosterone, which will make, like, somebody more athletic, for example, and they'll also develop secondary sex characteristics. Same with estrogen.
Right.
Okay. What's next? I skipped a page.
Yeah. So this line is really important. Feminists did not question the realm of physical sex, and this is sort of where Butler comes in, right? It's this role of sex as an immutable category, but gender as the sort of battleground of feminism, right? So we eliminate gender-based discrimination or differences along gender lines, but keep them along sex lines. And Butler and other later feminists start to question whether sex is really so set in stone and binary and before social forces as many feminists before had posited.
Yeah. This pink highlighted section is why Fausto-Sterling's project is so important. She's coming at biology from a feminist perspective, which is really novel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You want me to read that section out real quick?
The pink section?
Yeah.
Sure.
But feminist definitions of sex and gender left open the possibility that the male-female differences in cognitive function and behavior could result from sex differences, and thus, in some circles, the matter of sex versus gender became a debate about how hardwired intelligence and a variety of behaviors are in the brain, while in others, there seemed no choice but to ignore many of the findings of contemporary neurobiology. Yeah, so she's talked about this setup of the way that, very much like in the vein of someone like Latour, there's this sectioning off of some type of thing as like this natural category that cannot be questioned, right, of sex. And so you either have people that are accepting or rejecting this category of sex for political reasons. But no one, or like the findings of neurobiology, right? They have to accept the category of sex. So they have to reject something like neurobiology because neurobiology is making claims along the sex lines that they don't agree with. And they hadn't really gotten to the level of critique where they're understanding how the premises of a separate dual-sexed binary assumes certain things about an already pre-gendered system. As going back to the whole Butler, sexing is a type of gendering.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this book is... Gender Trouble is 1980s, right?
Oh gosh, I can never remember the year for Gender Trouble. Might be late 70s.
Oh,
no.
Fausto-Sterling definitely
1990.
cites... Oh, okay.
Yeah. But this book is like 2000 something, right?
Yes, I think it is 2000 or 2001. So she explicitly cites Bodies That Matter. So, of course, she has read Butler, and it's likely that Butler's argument is influencing Fausto-Sterling here. Also, there's this anecdote that permeates the chapter about a sports competition where a woman gets disqualified because through sex testing, they find out that she has Y chromosome. She has a condition called androgen insensitivity syndrome. So her body developed as female, and socially she is female. And something interesting Fausto-Sterling brings up here is that sex testing is particularly important in women's sports because participating in sports is seen as a masculine thing. So every woman who participates in sport is already seen as like pushing a sex boundary, like not a real woman just by virtue of her participation in sports. I think we see women in politics in a similar way, which is why Republican women need to like overcompensate for their femininity in their appearance.
I mean, you had people claiming Michelle Obama was transgender, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that goes in the same category as like people who claim Taylor Swift is transgender, though. It's just like a liberal-aligned woman has to be transgender. She has to be deceitful.
Right.
Yes, and okay, the IOC is like the sports commission that determines the rules for sex testing. And they use chromosome or DNA tests, or historically the inspection of breasts and genitals. This was before feminists would say that this is degrading and insulting. They then use more distant, like, quote-unquote objective categories for sex testing. But doctors use a completely different criteria. They use reproductive capacity. Most doctors, if a child is born with two X chromosomes, oviducts, ovaries, and a uterus, along with a penis and scrotum on the outside, because the child has ovaries and the uterus, it's capable of reproduction. Therefore, doctors would define it as female, despite the external genitalia being male. This reinforces the idea that sexing is a social decision influenced by the milieu in which the facts that someone believes in are created. This comes from Donna Haraway on page 7. Fausto-Sterling cites Haraway. Haraway's ideas that facts are not universal truths, but they're rooted in specific histories, practices, languages, and peoples. And on page 6, she brings up what Haraway calls the God trick, which is the idea that knowledge is produced from above, from a place that denies the individual scholar's location in a real and troubled world. And this is something that scientists fall into, when they believe that their work is apolitical and objective.
Yes, and it's precisely following in the vein of Latour and others who sort of forged this critique that Donna Haraway and others pick up very strongly.
Yeah. The thing about feminists is that they tend to reject this. They're able to reject the God trick. However, their theory isn't grounded in biology, so they're also unable to engage with the world of sex and sex determination.
Right. And so this is important because this whole section here, as part of Dueling Dualisms, is called Real or Constructed. And it's going, again, over that, like I mentioned, that's why I keep bringing up Latour for this section. It's this idea, is sex real or is it socially constructed? And the answer is sort of both, right? Sex is based upon a set of facts, and facts are a thing that are determined through social interest, social institutions. You can't separate a fact from its network. As we were just talking about systems theory, you can't separate a node from its network. And so if you can't separate a fact from its network, then it is both real and constructed because it's part of a social network. Within this social network, it is a fact, right?
Mm-hmm. Captain Jumpy, it's interesting that you referred to your cat as a she, despite the fact that she has a penis. Like, that's a social decision, right? Probably made by the doctors once they found that she has reproductive capacity. That would be my guess. Okay. Another thing I want to point out in page 6 is that most people in Fausto-Sterling listserv the vocal majority favor body-based biological explanations of human sexual behavior. They have technical names for preferences they believe to be immutable. This still exists today. People see biology as sort of like an end-all, be-all explanation for sexuality. Even if people don't understand anything about biology, they'll try to use biological definitions. They'll be like, certain behavior is hardwired
right.
in people, like evo-psych people.
I mean, even the sort of mainstream narrative around something like Born This Way is predicated on that, right? So I can't, they say I have like a biological thing that forces me to be gay, right? And there's a sort of way that they're correct and incorrect at the same time, as we'll get into, because there's, with the irreducibility of social and biological, there's a continuation of that understanding that it really isn't like, it's not like you can simply choose other. That's not the point. But also not that these things are like the way that they are forever, right? These aren't like, oh, you have the gay gene, you're gay. It's not how it's much more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, immediately after the spaying, we thought that the Fosters just sexed her incorrectly. Then a few years later, a different vet pointed out her penis, and by then we had settled into she-her. Yeah.
Interesting.
My partner's friend's cat also got sexed incorrectly, I believe, but it was just like a confusion about the genitalia. The cat went from being a Luna to a Merlin. Isn't Hegel's thing that truth exists in systems? Is he a systems theorist? I do not know Hegel.
I don't think Hegel is a systems theorist, because I don't think systems theory existed yet.
Yeah.
Systems theory is generally a thing within, it's sort of like, generally, my understanding is it's like an adoption of certain precepts in critical theory to scientific theories.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it really makes sense for him to be a systems theorist. So I don't think so.
Yeah.
He has a systemic understanding, but that's different than being a systems theorist.
Okay. Then Fausto-Sterling explains some Foucault's biopower, which is like the society's method of controlling living bodies. The first form is about. Wait, where am I looking? The first centered on the individual body. The role of many science professionals, including the so-called human sciences, being aimed to optimize and standardize the body's function. Traditionally, it's been male and Caucasian. And then, although this book focuses on gender, I regularly discuss the ways in which the ideas of both race and gender emerge from underlying assumptions about the body's physical nature. Kind of unrelated, but I read a critique on Goodreads of Sexing the Body that was basically like, this book doesn't go into race at all, which I would have to agree with. I don't think she actually talks about
really a
both
critique.
race and gender. You mean like critique in the it's a criticism?
No, I don't even think that that's really a proper criticism. Like, you can't. It's not the subject of the text.
I mean, she says that it is here. She says that she regularly does so, and then she doesn't.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. But I wouldn't hold the fact that she doesn't go into race against the text unless she cited it as one of her goals. Yeah, back to Foucault. Foucault's second form of biopower, biopolitics of the population, emerged to develop the survey and statistical methods needed to supervise and manage births and mortality, the level of health, life expectancy, and longevity. For Foucault, discipline had a double meaning. On one hand, it implied a form of control or punishment. On the other, it referred to an academic body of knowledge, the discipline of history or biology. Disciplinary knowledge developed in the fields of embryology, endocrinology, surgery, psychology, biochemistry have encouraged physicians to attempt to control the very gender of the body, including its capacities, gestures, movements, location, and behaviors. So, on the one hand, we have physicians that are actively standardizing bodies. When in relation to sex, that means performing corrective surgeries on intersexual people. And then we have a discipline which reinforces the sex binary through the ways that they talk about their research and their findings.
Yeah,
Foucault,
and so
we
you
have a society of normalization, which is the maintenance of the sex binary.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about maintaining the norm through sort of the presupposition that the norm is normal, right? Is prior to, is natural. This category that happens above, or almost like the telos, or the way that things are supposed to be, right? But it's produced by the very system that it's attempting to talk about.
Okay. Is this the final paragraph? No, it's not. Okay. Then she talks about the relationship between gender and sexuality. like she's somebody who supports the gay rights movement as a, I believe, bisexual woman. And they're related because sexual behavior is part of gender. Thus, sex and sexuality are linked. We can see this in the sciences with the discussion of the gay gene. This is on page... Yes, here we go. In studies that search for genetic links to homosexuality, for example, the middle of the Kinsey scale disappears. Researchers seek to compare the extreme ends of the spectrum in hopes of maximizing the chance that they will find something of interest. This means that they're sort of like... They're isolating the most heterosexual and the most homosexual individuals to find and looking at the differences between them, hoping that they'll isolate the factors that influence sexuality.
Right, it's attempting to make it quantitative, where they're saying that there's this like linear relationship, right, where you say, a certain like it sort of already falls apart if you tried to apply it back to a spectrum, right? It's like, what, the more homosexual you are, the more you're going to follow this pattern? That seems like the relationship is going to completely change if you're something different along the scale. So it already starts to be very iffy, right?
Okay. In contrast... Okay. Then we talk about the different historical definitions of sexuality. That's what this cartoon goes over. We might have had the same behaviors across all of human history with relation to sexuality, like two people with penises having sex with each other. That's always happened. But the way that we define it has changed throughout time. There's another cartoon later on that talks about this later on. Let me find it right here. So, Model A is like a timeless view of sexuality. So these individuals are homosexual, heterosexual, role-playing, or gender inverts, no matter what point in history they are. And then Model B is that the person, like, theoretically, the genes might be identical. No, this is not Sterling Strong. This is Alice Santoro. Yeah, depending on the historical context, the same person would have been labeled in a different way.
Yeah, it's a comparison of different models of understanding the history of sexuality, right?
Okay. Next section, I wanted to... Oh. Yes. Then another thing she talks about is the colonialist aspects of sex. So, feminist anthropologists researched other cultures to search for matriarchies, and they didn't really find much. They found that they found more like patriarchal societies. However, there's an assumption here that, first of all, the idea of only two sexes, and second of all, that anthropologists would know sexual equality when they saw it. That's a sort of like colonialist assumption. Another one, okay, Nigerian anthropologist Oyeronke Obeyumi writes, all cultures organize their social world through a perception of human bodies as male or female. Yeah, not all cultures do this. For example, Yoruba culture organizes society more so according to age. Like, pronouns will refer to age and seniority relative to the speaker. And by anthropologists using like male and female labels to describe Yoruba culture, they impose their through language, they impose a sexed understanding of their social structure.
Yeah,
on
yeah.
Yoruba
I
soldiers.
wanted to maybe how in depth are we going to go on the chapter? Because I think we got most of the important points. That sex is not separated from gender, as sort of going through Butler, and the way that these things are immutably tied to a sort of cultural biological understanding that doesn't really have an inside or an outside.
We're getting there. That's one of the Mobius strip is the last thing that I want to go over in this chapter. I also want to look at the Butler section.
Okay.
Okay, so here are the false dichotomies from philosopher Val Plumwood. Reason versus nature, male versus female, mind versus body, master-slave, freedom, necessity, or nature.
Hey, Bob,
Human nature.
your question's directly relevant to here. Yeah, is this related to sex stemming from the division of labor and mode of production? Yeah, precisely. This is what we're getting at here. The separation between these things is part of the sort of class distinction that's been upheld through an idea like sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think Fausto-Sterling ever talks about like the origins of sex in that sense. I think that sort of goes beyond the scope of the book because she's wants to focus on biology and like science.
Yeah.
The project is to integrate feminism with science.
Right. For not just for feminist reasons, but also for a better scientific model. Yeah. But necessarily these past models have a lot of assumptions about things like sex born into them that recapitulate themselves towards certain outcomes in the way that we look at something like sex.
Bob says, but like the means of production of the time exerted an environmental pressure that pushed sex to being what it was. Thus all cultures asymptote towards the same thing. Yeah, that's a very particular way of viewing gender/sex, I think. Like, I see an attempt to look at it from like a materialist perspective, but that's not the only way of looking at the history of sex and sexuality.
Yeah, it's also worth noting there's no universal means of production.
Okay, so let's get to Butler. Some feminist theorists, especially during the last decade, have tried, with varying degrees of success, to create a non-dualistic account of the body. Judith Butler, for example, tries to reclaim the material body for feminist thought. Why, she wonders, has the idea of materiality come to signify that which is irreducible, that which can support construction but cannot itself be constructed? We have, Butler says, and I agree, to talk about the material body. There are hormones, genes, prostates, uteri, and other body parts and physiologies that we use to differentiate male from female, that become part of the ground from which varieties of sexual experience and desire emerge. Furthermore, variations in each of these aspects of physiology profoundly affect an individual's experience of gender and sexuality. But every time we try to return to the body as something that exists prior to socialization, prior to discourse about male and female, Butler writes, we discover that matter is fully sedimented with discourses on sex and sexuality that prefigure and constrain the uses to which that term can be put. I ran into this problem as we were talking about the hormones chapter. Like, Fausto-Sterling tries to get us to see the sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, as growth hormones with a broad variety of functions, which is sort of like objectively true, but it's impossible for me to conceptualize these hormones as anything outside of their role in sex determination. Because of this, like, the way that the discourse around them has worked. Then let's skip down to the Mobius strip. Where is this? Is this in, Volatile Bodies by Elizabeth Gross. In the idea...
Is Gross also a biologist? I forget.
I don't think so.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, the Mobius strip, the way that it works is that you're able to get from the inside of the circle to the outside of the loop, all like continuously. There isn't ever a strict separation between one side versus the other side of this loop structure. Yeah, there is no inside or outside. Well, there kind of is, because this side is definitely the inside, this side is definitely the outside, but it's always like there's a continuous
well, it's
connection
not the
between them.
inside because it's the same side as the other side. Just
yeah.
from a different
It's continuous.
vantage point. Yeah.
Okay. And the idea is that we can conceptualize like the inside and outside of the body this way, meaning the nature versus these like societal determinators of gender in this way. Like, they're not strictly separate, even though we can see two like influences as individually separate. Like, for example, someone's hormone levels are distinct from somebody's like cultural norms, but the way that they influence the individual are always going to be continuous together.
Yeah,
they're going to affect each other.
Yeah. There's no isolated nature or culture. That it's necessarily nature culture. I mean, even an idea like nature is produced in culture. It's an important distinction because I don't think you can really even have a proper understanding of something like science without understanding that there's no inside and outside fundamentally.
Yeah. The last thing that Fausto-Sterling is going to do in this chapter is set up developmental systems theory as the analytical framework through which we see through which we see sex. But I'm going to kind of skip through this because we'll talk more about this in the final chapter. Okay. Chapter 2 is called That Sex Which Prevaileth. It's a quote from a law in Britain where they were like, we're gonna assign people's gender based on that sex which prevail. I forget what it was. It was based on like either voting rights or their ability to marry. I don't quite remember. But it's the beginning of the idea that one has a true sex that underlies somebody's like intersex characteristics. Somebody can't be truly intersex. They're a male or a female with intersex qualities. Okay.
Yeah, it's this idea that one sex is dominant over the other, therefore trying to go to something like a binary, because one of the sexes is prevailing over the other.
Mm-hmm. So, whether one falls into the category of man or woman matters in concrete ways. Specifically, we have different rights associated with males and females depending on their sex. Even though both males and females have the right to vote today, we still have not quite. We don't have equality between the sexes. Like, first of all, paternity leave is unequal, and second of all, we have like the draft for males only. However, if we begin to conceptualize sex as a continuum, that kind of breaks down this these legal distinctions that we have for people. Because there's no way to like set up an either or situation when something is a continuum or something is inquantifiable. Then we're going to talk about the history of hermaphrodites or intersexuals.
Yeah, that was. This is a pretty. If you're into like body horror, you'll enjoy the next chapter. It goes into in great detail all of the different surgeries that are performed and were performed on intersex people to fit them cleanly into a binary, especially at birth. Sometimes these surgeries are performed without the knowledge of the parents, sometimes with the knowledge. Doctors would talk to parents and convince them that it's an immediate emergency, that they need to perform the surgery right away, or there's going to have psychological issues with the child, and the child won't know whether they're properly a male or female, and this will cause them distress and ruin their life.
Mm-hmm.
There's this incredible social pressure for it, that we would think of as generally like gendered pressure, but here it's being exerted in the maintenance of a sex binary, right? Again, recapitulating a sex gender continuum. Bob says, so like circumcision, like cutting cutting parts of an enlarged clitoris or penis, depending on what you want to call it, to make it smaller so that it fits within the quote unquote correct range to be a female.
Or if somebody has one ovary and one testes, one of the glands gets removed.
Yep. They just up and remove it. They decide this one is, because remember, they're working backward from the binary. That's the important part. They're working backward from the sexed binary, which is a gendered category. And so they see something like, oh, there's one testicle, one ovary. Which one is the proper one? Which one belongs there, right? Working backward from the binary. And so once they use one of several methods to determine which one's the quote-unquote proper one, then they quote-unquote correct the child. Bob, circumcision, you just meant like morally. Circumcision is a little bit more particular because it's cultural and cosmetic, not necessarily. These surgeries can actually dramatically change. Circumcision arguably changes function as well, but they can dramatically alter and change bodily functions, including, like we were saying, gonads and all sorts of other stuff. As well as removing pieces altogether. Again, often at the extreme social pressure from doctors claiming that this is going to be some dramatic ailment on the child. She goes into some studies on, I think, children who get to make the choice when they're older. And often these children elect to keep the features that they were born with and developed, and are much happier with their choice, or are happy with their choice.
Yeah, you're right. These are done outside of the consent of the infant, and it pigeonholes them.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, Minnie, she goes into it at length. Often medical records are then obfuscated, like someone who has surgeries done on them as a young child or infant often doesn't remember it, and it can be difficult to even convince doctors to reveal your medical records to you. There was several stories in there of people who only learned about their intersexuality, quote unquote, right, in their 20s or 30s, and only because a doctor elected to tell them, or because it became suddenly relevant to a medical case. Like even sometimes people would get cancer on a part of their body that they didn't believe that they had.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's different historical laws and scientific, quote-unquote, scientific understandings of how to treat intersexual people and how they were created. So the
And how they're
Talmud
put back into
puts
binary.
yeah. So the Talmud has sort of like a three-sex situation where the hermaphrodites all have they're all forbidden from inheriting estates, secluding themselves with women. They're like an intermediate category that's distinct from both. However, then there's this continuum situation where the sexes are seen as different temperatures. Women are cool, men are hot, and then masculine women are feminine, men are warm. So depending on your exact temperature, you could fall anywhere along a spectrum. This is also how some progressives talk about gender and sexuality today, but the way that it's still binary is kind of weird, because it's not just like we determine sex through just chromosomes or just what genitalia you have. Like, for example, you might have is somebody who has like they're completely male but they have ovaries more female than somebody who is completely male but has a vagina. Like, there's no way to determine that.
Yeah. Attempting to turn that into quantifiable metrics is incredibly arbitrary at the very least. Because it's going to, again, be based on social norms, right? Oh, this fits the social role of the same kind of bodies that have a vagina or that have this kind of reproductive organ, right? All these things are deeply, deeply social because there's no disconnect between the social and the biological, as we went over. Should we go on to the next chapter?
Yeah, let me see if there's anything else interesting. Making of the modern intersexual. Oh yeah, gradually the third sex, the hermaphrodite, disappears completely in medicine, and we see everybody as either male or female.
Yeah, I think she has some footnotes in this because this has gotten better in the last several years. Obviously, after the book was published as well. I think this is like a second edition, but anyway.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
another thing that we forgot to talk about is that often people's social behavior, their interests, would influence their sex determination. Like,
yes.
In the very beginning, they talk about somebody who wanted to vote, so they wanted to be classified as a male. This person has, like, penis and a scrotum, but they also menstruate. So those factors were used to determine sex, but also the fact that they didn't like to do like hard labor, and they like to arrange different colors of cloth. I think it was that was seen as equally important as the fact that they have a certain anatomy.
Right.
And we still see things this way kind of today, or we would if it wasn't for the fact that we operated on infants before they can be social in any type of way. Okay. Third chapter is also about intersexuals, and it's mostly going to be about the surgeries that are done on infants and how they're treated. This first part is about how there's like a huge rush to determine an infant's sex when they're born. It's like an emergency.
Yeah, we were just talking about that, especially with like doctors talking about this sort of state of emergency of having to properly determine sex of the child, both for them and then impressed upon the parents and anyone else involved in the process. They must, as soon as possible, often stemming from some of these sort of cultural, like John Money's studies, among others, that there and Freudian stuff as well, that there needs to be this sort of proper gendered situating, right? If you know the proper sex of the child early, then you can properly acclimatize them to be fitting the model of being male or being female, of like gendered roles, of fitting into society. But if they are confused, there's this belief that they're not going to properly fulfill their social roles because they'll have ideas that are mixed up.
Mm-hmm. I just find this thing over here very interesting. This is the embryonic development of the genitalia. You basically start off with like this donut shape that comes off the body, and then either the hole in the middle fuses, which is how you get the scrotum over here, or it remains a hole, which is how you get the vagina. And you can see how the different tissues will like correspond to each other in both the fully differentiated male and female anatomy. I like this a lot. Yes, then she goes over different types of intersexuality. We have most common types of intersexuality are congenital adrenal hyperplasia, androgen insensitivity syndrome, gonadal dysgenesis, hypospadias, and unusual chromosome conditions such as XXY or XO.
Yeah, this ends up being important because certain kinds can be treated in different ways, and there are treatments that and conditions that have side effects to them that sometimes get deprioritized over the gender binary, over the sex gender binary, right? As we were talking about, like if they don't have the proper looking parts, they might be confused about their place in the world, and that could be a big issue. And so oftentimes procedures were done which were less helpful in terms of the child's long-term health, but did a better job reinforcing the binary. We went into some of this with the CAH infants, right? Or CAH children in gestation, something like that.
Mm-hmm. It's in this chapter. Then what's interesting is she talks about the frequency. So They estimate that 1.7% of all births are mixed sex babies.
Yeah.
Which seems
Which
like
is a
not
lot.
that much at first, but albinism is roughly as frequent, and yet most people have seen at least one albino person in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, if it's over 1%, that means if you go to a school with, especially since it's, as far as we know, like quite normally distributed, if you go to a school with 1,000 people in it, right, like high school, that
There
means
should be
there's
10
gonna be,
intersexuals.
yeah, at least 10. You said it was like 1.7%, so that's like
Yeah.
17 people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think albinism is quite as normally distributed amongst the population.
Yeah,
I'm not
it's
exactly
not.
sure on that. Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
I've
the
met
frequency
several
for the
albino
gene
people.
for CAH varies widely around the world. So,
Interesting.
35 per 1,000. You big Eskimos born had a double dose of the CAH gene, in contrast, only 0.005 out of 1,000 New Zealanders expressed the trait. The frequency of a related genetic change that leaves the genitalia unaffected but can cause premature pubic hair growth in children, and symptoms such as unusual hair growth and male pattern baldness in young women also varies widely around the world. The incidence of intersexuality may be on the rise, she also suggests.
There's also discussion here of the relationship between intersexuals and gender-coded behaviors, such as like whether people who had intersex conditions and were determined to be like female intersex, quote unquote, would be more into masculine things than like a control group of quote unquote normal female development, as well as like sexual interest. Like, are people who have CAH genes, for example, more likely to be lesbians? I think a lot of this was inconclusive, right?
Yeah. She talks about a prenatal treatment for CAH. This will prevent the masculinization of the XX child's genitalia, which is what CAH is. Basically, like, you have extra testosterone, and a female child will get like an enlarged clitoris.
Right.
So they can take dexamethasone, and that'll prevent that from happening. And despite all the side effects,
Yeah, this is what I was
most
talking about
mothers
earlier.
will, like the vast majority of mothers, will choose to do this.
I think she goes into, isn't there certain conditions where it's better for the health, and then a lot of conditions where it's not, depending on like how prevalent the it's been a while, but I remember something like that, where there's certain times where it makes sense to intervene in that way for the health of the child, and other times where it doesn't make sense. But it's often done based upon aesthetic sensibilities, despite the fact that those children, when they grow up, seem to be generally fine with their anatomy.
Yeah, not every surgery is created equal, also. Like, if somebody wants to bear children, the fusion of the labia has to be corrected. But the clitoris size shouldn't matter. It doesn't. It has no effect on reproduction.
Right. It's clearly, or it's purely about aesthetics, at least in terms of how it's being evaluated there. and often corrections are going to reduce things like sexual function in terms of like pleasure and other stuff around that. Sensitivity.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go into many more details for this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's the phallometrics.
Oh yes, that is so fucking funny. The phallometric. This is the it was developed by activists to ridicule the way that doctors were determining the sex of children, which was they would measure the clitoris, and if it was a certain length, it would be considered unacceptable and prompt surgery, and if it was long enough, then that's when it dips into being male, right? That's like, oh, this person has a penis, so this is a male.
Yeah.
But it's literally as simple as a ruler. There's no there's not very much more consideration that goes into this determination, which is very silly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can have an overly large clitoris as a woman, but you can't have an overly large penis as a man. Or as an infant.
Yeah. Yeah, but another point is that size at birth of those organs does not necessarily strongly correlate with size post-puberty. So oftentimes these children are having surgeries performed on them to fit aesthetic sensibilities without even an understanding of how that child will develop in the future.
Yeah. Then we get to talk about the various surgeries to quote-unquote correct people's anatomy.
Probably don't show those on screen. It's a bit much.
I think the gruesomeness is effective. Oh, then we talk about how... We already talked about this at the start a little bit, but there's an assumption that sexual ambiguity is psychologically harmful to the individual, when this is not really necessarily true. It's more about how society views.
Yeah, it's not true if you ask
ambiguity.
the people that are going through this. It's basically a thing asserted by people around them who are upset about them not fitting into this binary. It distresses parents and others institutionally by them not fitting into this clean binary.
Mm-hmm. Fausto-Sterling will advocate that rather than doing surgery on infants, they should be explained, their condition should be explained to them, and they should be connected to support groups.
Yeah. So that they can have adequate support and then consent if they want to undergo a procedure later in life, which is often more effective too if they want a procedure, because the tissue is going to be fully developed and so is not going to change all around a bunch of scar tissue as well.
Then we're going to talk about sexuality. A healthy intersexual is a straight intersexual. Yes, there's the belief that if an intersexual turns out to be homosexual, that the wrong sex was chosen for them.
Yeah, exactly. So if you say, "Oh, we've determined that this person is female based upon our categorization of their organs and body," then if they go on to date and have sex with women, then, oh, we must have done something wrong because clearly they're a heterosexual man.
Yeah.
So here, homophobia and gender roles again,
The
revolving
assumption
around homophobic standards.
that heterosexuality is natural.
Exactly.
Okay. Next chapter is Should There Only Be Two Sexes? This is building on an earlier work of Fausto-Sterling's where she suggested a 5-sex model.
Yeah, she mostly also she goes against a lot of this in her own footnotes in the second edition, right?
Yeah.
She's like, since then I've changed my mind on this. I don't know if we need to go into that too much, to be honest, considering she herself somewhat goes back on this. But it's basically the idea that there's an alternate model that would, at least in the current situation, fit certain biological characteristics and social outcomes better. And this is her proposed model for that. Even if still quite reductive. I don't feel like we need to go into this too much, but if you have something,
yeah,
you want
this
to
is where she
mention.
advocates stop infant genital surgery. This is a shorter chapter, and it's about the intersexuals and surgery.
Shall we go into the next chapter?
Yeah, it's lots of statistics here.
Yeah, it's worth noting, as we mentioned, she's a biologist, and there's a very studious focus on documenting the studies that have been done on this and the way that these have developed through time. That she's very particular about not taking these as assumptions and understanding, going through things like medical standards for infant surgery as they develop through time in different manuals that were standardized, things like that. That she's quite particular. She's not just asserting these without explanation or justification. That's why like almost half the book is footnotes.
Yes. The footnotes are sometimes just citations, sometimes they're whole, like, contextual explanations. Okay. Next chapter is Sexing the Brain. And it's about how there was this belief that men had a larger corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is it's this bundle of fibers that connects your left and right hemispheres. So if you have a larger one...
I would actually start with... I would actually sort of start with why they even were looking at this, right? So again, going back to this idea of there being two sexes that are cleanly different from one another, and then saying that there must be something about our biology that explains differences between sexes.
And it would be our brain that determines the difference in behavior.
Right, yeah. And so there's this idea that there's these clean differences between men and women that might determine these social differences. And one of the explanations, post hoc explanations, right? Because necessarily all this is going to be post hoc. You've already sorted people into these categories. And now post hoc, you're going to look at something like the corpus callostrum, as Richard was talking about, as a proposed explanation for behavioral differences.
Yeah. Are intersexes only observed in mammals, or is this universal across animals in general? I would assume that
that's a good question.
It's universal because anything can happen, really.
Enjoy your evening, Captain Jumpy. I'm actually not sure, Bob. I would presume that it happens in any species with sexual reproduction. To varying degrees.
Okay, I was a little bit disappointed by this chapter because it only talks about this one anatomic thing. But more recently, I think there have been I mean, I've never heard of the corpus callosum as being the root of sex differences in the brain. Probably because, but I've heard a lot about males and females having different brains. In like my psychology classes, for example. But this tends to be bad science. Like, she's going to talk about statistics in this chapter and how, like, the decision to view something as statistically significant is not it's not objective.
Yeah. I love this thing that you're zeroing in on here. This chart of the left brain, right brain. Here, the switch between the 19th century and the 20th century.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah, this is fun. Kind of a complicated chart. But what's kind of funny is that what I highlighted here is that in the 19th century, the left brain was seen as male and the right brain was seen as female. But in the 20th century, the left brain is seen as female and the right brain is seen as male. I would say that we've kind of gone back to the 19th century conception because we see the left brain as rational and the right brain as artistic. Which is a little bit silly and reductive, but whatever.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons it's so messy, but yeah, I think you're probably right. I think the verbal one of the reasons for this switch was the whole like verbal versus visual spatial, which is still seen as like a male-female split thing. Where verbal stuff is seen as like women are naturally better at versus visuospatial stuff men are seen as naturally better at. And that's actually still very much upheld. We actually went over this quite a bit in my sociology of gender course, where this was still commonly held belief, and statistically is there is a difference, right? How that statistic comes to be is the important question, right? But yeah, that would be my explanation for why they swapped, is the visual spatial versus verbal split.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if there's anything interesting. Yeah, this one's very, very heavy on the data.
Yeah, Bob says, could frequency, and here he's talking about, are they? I don't actually know. Could frequency be linked to the level of sexual dimorphism? Frequency of sexual, of intersex? If so, human sexual dimorphism is famously low compared to other mammals, meaning we're naturally more diverse? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Like we have more intersexuality because we have low sexual dimorphism.
I don't know. I mean, it could very well be the opposite, right? If there's more dimorphism, there might be more opportunity for things that don't fit cleanly into a category. I don't know. That would be an interesting thing to look up, but not within the scope of this essay, because it's mostly focused on humans. and then the ways that different studies on different animals affected the way that we view sex in humans, like rats.
Someone's PhD thesis in the making. Could be. I actually wouldn't expect there to be a correlation because sexual dimorphism is determined along a developmental pathway. Like, you have an expression of certain, what are they called? Chemical messengers. And they will, tell the cell to express a certain amount of gene, create a certain amount of protein, which will can depending on the levels and the amount of time that the messenger is expressed, will produce different levels of dimorphism, quote unquote. Intersexuality tends to result from mutations rather than not mutations necessarily, but like that or the maternal environment being a particular way. I wouldn't expect I just wouldn't expect there to be a correlation.
It looks like there generally isn't, but there's specific ways that genetic drift can maybe influence it. I found a paper on it that seems interesting. That specifically has here, I'll link it in the chat. That specifically has experimental data in it as well.
What do you mean by phonetics? Also, thanks for linking that in the chat.
Oh, they probably mean phenotypes, but I don't know. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, that's a bit of a false dichotomy. Because basically what you're asking is if, I mean, those are going to be the same unless there's post mRNA post processing.
Anyway, I guess enjoy.
Yeah. This chart is really important over here. Sorry, this drawing. There might be the same average difference between two humps, but depending on how they're distributed, how wide the distribution is, they can overlap to different degrees. Which will determine whether or not the difference between the groups is statistically significant or not.
Yeah, it's very easy, especially because everything around this is going to be post categorization. And so, well, it's actually an interesting mix because they can do categorization as it benefits them. But when you're designating types like this, you're necessarily then looking post hoc through data, and there's a lot of ways that you can change data in that way to have groups appear more significantly different.
And with sex differences, what tends to be the case is that we have more of this bottom case over here.
Right, which then raises the question of whether these groups are separate groups at all, or whether they would better fit along a single continuum or more than two continuums, right?
I'm not sure what you mean, but I think the general idea is clear. That if there's so much overlap, that's not the determining factor for difference, or we can't see the two groups as
what I mean is
different.
that if they're overlapping so much, it raises the question of how meaningful this separation into separate groups is. And whether there could be more or less groupings that would make sense depending on what you're trying to analyze.
Okay. Chapter 6 And I believe chapter 7 also. Let me check the... Okay, yes. Sex glands, hormones, and gender chemistry is chapter 6. Do sex hormones really exist is chapter 7. And then also the rodent's tail is kind of related. Chapter 7 and 8, sorry, 6 and 7 are about hormones, which probably today we see as the most important or like the most fundamental determiners of sex.
Yeah,
because these are growth hormones
and chromosomes. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, chromosomes will determine the whether you express certain proteins or whether you have the potential to develop certain developmental characteristics. But you need hormones to actually develop them because they they'll activate the genes basically. Genes by themselves are inert, they're just information. You need transcription factors to stabilize the mRNA polymerase that is gonna transcribe mRNA from the genes and then protein from the mRNA.
Right, yeah.
So it takes a
Again,
variety of
undermining
factors
that primary.
for the genes to be active. Okay.
Let's see, what do you want to say about this chapter?
Yeah.
It's a good chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite long, and she's going to talk about the different developmental effects that they have. So this chapter is it's very fact heavy. You're gonna learn a lot about what sex hormones do. Here's an experiment on transferring gonads. So all of these roosters get castrated and then they get gonads inserted into them. Whether those are...
Yeah, they fucked around with a lot of rats.
Yeah. And then she also talks about the politics of these sciences.
Because they're as they develop as this sort of, especially testosterone becomes this very mythologized thing about how it's tied in with male dominance, and there's this essence of masculinity to it, all these different things, right? And she breaks down some of the ways that we talk about sexual hormones. One of the most important of which was the discovery of lower but still present amounts of testosterone and estrogen in classically described female and male bodies, respectively. Yeah, rat body horror.
Yeah. Yeah, she
there's a
she
lot
talks
of
about the
interesting
politics
stuff
here. The effects of feminism on the science. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff. Highly recommend people read this chapter because it's pretty long and detailed, and it's hard to go into.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of interesting ways to talk about the actual differences observed, and how actually determinative they are of differences, what happens when you introduce different amounts of different hormones at different stages of development. It's very interesting. But especially breaking down a one-to-one relationship of hormones and behavior, I think, is probably the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, behavior is the next chapter, chapter 9. I quite like chapter 9. Yeah, this talks about a lot of experiments. Transformed guinea pigs. This is a masculinized sister, a castrated sister, normal sister, and normal brother. The idea here is that castrating the female guinea pig doesn't seem to do much in terms of size. A castrated male will also be smaller. While the presence of testosterone induces, like, a larger size overall in the guinea pig. These guys are cute. I want to pet them. Steinach's interest in homosexuality is interesting. Like, he sees homosexuality as biologically driven. I'm just kind of curious. Like, people who are raised outside of a social context never develop language or sexual drive. So how can sexuality be biologically determined? Oh yes. There's a big, a long beef between Moore and Steinach. Between whether there's an inherent bisexuality in the body or not. The inherent bisexuality is the idea that the body can develop as male or female or begins as
gestation.
With the
yeah.
But the body has the capacity to become either sex or both sexes. Experimental results.
I don't think we need to go into that too much, do we?
Mm-hmm.
Or
yeah, then there's a thing about
things.
Antagonism versus, like, synergistic effects. Okay. Do sex hormones really exist? Gender becomes chemical. Let's see how this... I don't quite remember how this chapter is distinct. Here's the chemical structures.
Well, the idea goes back to this... Oh, I have to sneeze one sec. No, I guess I don't. The idea of gender becoming chemical is specifically here, she means this kind of essential separation between sexes and in a gendering system. So as gender becomes this thing that's associated with certain behaviors are played out as certain hormones, this kind of, like, essential break between masculine and feminine becomes explained by hormones. So there's like a feminine essence to one and a masculine essence to the other.
Because these chemicals are completely different. The difference between male and female is just as discrete and simple as the chemical differences between testosterone and estradiol. And it might look like there's a significant difference here, but it's really just this double bond over here. Because this double bond to the oxygen and this bond over here can just undergo these are isomers. They can do keto ester isomerization. Not keto ester, what's it called? I'm so dumb.
I don't know what you're referring to, so
yeah.
that's okay.
Chemistry. Anyway,
Well, I know it's chemistry, but I don't know the term you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Is it ester? Oh, it's not aldol. God damn it.
That's okay.
I'll remember. Okay.
Well, yeah. So Bob says, "Funny how such a small molecular change leads to so much macro drama." Yeah,
Yes.
I mean that's sort of the interesting thing, right? Because the hormone, what it actually does, as with any hormone, is relatively small, but because it's the actual things in cells doing the production, doing all of these different changes. So it doesn't actually take that much difference to have differences that can result in so much drama, right? Because actually these things are not essences. It's not like you're injecting yourself with magical chemicals that boost your muscles or whatever. It's chemicals that tell your that interact with cells in a way that they end up producing in a different way, right? Fundamentally, it's still your cell doing most of the things.
Yeah. Then also this chapter talks about the Bureau of Social Hygiene, which is comes from the Rockefeller family, it seems. And this institution funds a lot of research into hormones and sex difference in the 20th century. The NRC's Committee for Research and Problems of Sex. This also another founding organization. During its first 25 years, CRPS funded much of the major research in hormone biology, the anthropology of sexual behavior, animal psychology, and later the famed Kinsey studies. The Kinsey studies are the for the Kinsey scale from homosexual to heterosexual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we also talk about the eugenics. Like these institutions had like social goals of improving society by controlling and optimizing the body. It was very
and by
normal
optimizing we mean producing a certain kind of body relative to
Yes.
their goals, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The type of body that behaves in society.
Exactly.
When it might really be the situation that the
social
body
rules.
is in that produces good behavior, but they're not. The construction of spheres and the like science spheres are completely separate at the stage. It's very interesting, like, how normal it was to be eugenicist at a certain time in history, especially in the 20th century after Darwinism. A lot has changed. Has sort of like it's been a while since it came into existence.
I think this part's really interesting. Even at the biochemical level, it turned out sexual distinctions were far from clear-cut. In fact, during the 1970s, biochemists realized that testosterone, the quote-unquote most masculine of molecules, usually exerted its influence on brain development only after it had been transformed through a process called aromatization into estrogen. The scientists who discovered the phenomenon, which again made it difficult to conceptualize these steroid hormones as specific sex hormones, echoed the 1930s reactions to finding of estrogenic activity in stallion urine. They called aromatization paradoxical or surprising. Nevertheless, attention had returned to the role of estrogen in sexual development. This was specifically estrogen's role in sexual development. One of the reasons it had been neglected is there was this idea that the feminine is natural, right? Female development is this process that happens without any intervention. It's just sort of things working without any change, right? There's like, it's development with no necessary extra pieces. Whereas male development was this process of changing the body through hormonal interventions. So there's this idea that sort of like estrogen keeps things the same. Testosterone changes things and masculinizes them. Again, going back to this dualism of the active, passive, masculine, feminine. And it was only until later that scientists actually started looking more into the changes that estrogen actually makes in the body. That it's not simply like neutral.
Yeah. Things started to get interesting when scientists found estrogen in males and testosterone in females in their urine and in their gonads.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that.
Yes. And then their experience like doing cross-sex hormone implantation and action. So testes transplanted into castrated female rabbits could cause uterine growth.
Right,
Instead
yeah.
of like, I don't know, testicular growth or whatever.
Right, yeah. The effects don't like discriminate along classically sexed lines about how they impact cells within the body. It can cause growth in things that are quote unquote feminine or female body parts, right?
Yeah. It's a broad action growth hormone. Administration of the male hormone stimulated mammary growth, enlargement of the uterus, a striking enlargement of the clitoris, and periods of prolonged estrus. All of which, except maybe the enlargement of the clitoris, which are seen as feminine. At first, scientists tried to fit their findings into a dualistic scheme. For a while, they referred to cross-sex hormones as heterosexual hormones. They're just nutritional byproducts with no connection to the gonads.
Yeah, they tried to claim that they were basically incidental and not doing anything in the body.
In 1930, standardization became the central agenda of sex hormone experts.
One of the things that the idea of female development being like this natural thing that doesn't need interventions, one of the byproducts of this, among many other factors, is a condition like menopause being undertreated, under-discussed, under-researched. Because it again goes back to this idea like women don't need. I think she talks about this in one of the chapters. I don't remember which one, but women don't need this sort of support for their development and health like men do, supposedly, right?
You mean how women are like the default?
Yes.
Yes, I believe that's this chapter.
Yeah. It's somewhere in this chapter, but I don't remember where. Let's see.
It should be soon, I think.
Let's see.
Naming.
Oh, it looks like she only brings up menopause here.
No, she talks about it a little earlier.
Yeah, sex glands, hormones, and gender chemistry. This idea, because testosterone was seen as this like fountain of youth, right? Where older men took testosterone to like revitalize them, right? Because it and today we see that with like TRT, right? Testosterone replacement therapy. But there was early on there was not an analogous treatment for women in menopause, and it was only because it was still seen like testosterone would be this like universal thing that's like powerful and vital, whereas estrogen was thought to like decrease vitality, right? Again, this sort of stigmatization and separation between the active, the passive, the powerful, the weak. But actually, as Dr. Robert A. Wilson found, unlike they actually tried to treat menopausal women with testosterone first because of this, and it was only later when they tried estrogen that it actually found that it increased those postmenopausal women's vitality, right? So it again puts a sort of puts a lot of doubt on this model of estrogen being or testosterone being this like vital strengthening thing, because menopause will actually make you physically weaker, give you shaky hands, muscle atrophy, all these different things, brain fog. Lots of nasty stuff.
I'm looking in the previous chapter for the female as the default. Maybe it's.
Here. The female development pathway has often been referred to as the default pathway. This is from page 204.
Okay.
The scientific model of sexual development that won over others is the one that borrowed most from and best fit with conservative notions that characterize femaleness by passivity and lack. But it has done more than just bolster conservative viewpoints. Indeed, the idea that all embryos start as female, that the natural ground state is feminine. I think many people have probably heard this one. This idea that like all embryos start as female is indeed a very motivated way of talking about it.
Yeah. It's not really true that all embryos start as female. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Natural ground state is the feminine and maleness a mere afterthought. Has delighted some feminists. The feminist science writer Natalie, she's going about from a biological perspective, women are not the runners-up, women are the original article. It's sort of like a reversal of the whole Adam's rib thing, right?
Yes.
That woman comes from man.
Yeah, it looks like the early Rodent's Tale is not about behavior. Even the behavior is really the key part of this chapter. It's about how administering... Well, first of all, it's about how administering hormones, doing the transplants, will affect the physiological development of the rat, but also it'll affect the sexual behavior of the animal.
Yeah, oh yeah, this line is great. If femininity can contaminate or undermine masculinity, then does maintaining masculinity require suppression of the feminine? This was one of the things that this idea of the default evokes. is it actually goes back to the sort of patriarchal notion that femininity is something that has to be suppressed in men, right? Because it could take over and then make men weaker. It goes back to this trope. And it also plays into this idea of the masculine as the active again, right? This idea that men are like playing this, are doing this special thing by becoming men, whereas women are just sort of existing. Bob asks, is it anachronistic to label a fetus as either male or female? I believe so, yeah. Well, a fetus can be in several different stages, so...
Yeah, a fetus is generally, it's the third trimester, right?
I don't know. Can't it be called a fetus for most of the gestation period? At least casually? I don't know. Nine weeks until birth. So everything after it has a certain level of development until birth.
Between week 7 and week 12, the foundations of your baby's sex organs develop. 18 to 12, you can tell. I mean, it really depends on what you mean by male or female.
Right.
Like, because, I mean, fertilization will determine their chromosomes, and if you mean chromosomes, then calling a fetus male or female is entirely normal and correct.
Right, but then there's no original before that, before the fertilization process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Generally, the idea that fetuses are female is about the pre-hormonal wash state.
Yeah. When we learn about rat sex, very exciting. Oh, okay, so it's this chapter in which there's bisexual potential. This is according to the researcher Beach. What's his name? Frank Ambrose Beach.
Researchers always have hilarious names.
Mm-hmm. They detailed behaviors that they could quantify and designate as masculine or feminine, such as like grooming your babies if you're a mother, or mounting rats if you're a male rodent. First, he insisted on the diversity of animal behavior within each sex, within each species, and among different species and genera. Second, he took what we would today call a systems approach to animal behavior, emphasizing the interactions among the varied physiological systems within each body, as well as the social context eliciting or permitting particular behaviors. Third, he was an outspoken liberal on the topic of human sexual diversity. When looking at his career and ideas, we can once again see clearly how the social and scientific form part of a single fabric. Okay.
You want to go on to the last chapter, or is there anything else we want to cover?
I want to cover the scientific findings here. basically, the experiments that he did, he found sex differences in the control of male and female mating behaviors, or mounting and lordosis. Then he'll manipulate their hormones, I believe, and then see how their behavior changes. There's also a critical period of sexual behavior determination. That's the theory. Okay. So, where is he injecting? Testosterone injection at much younger ages elicited a full range of adult behavior. Many vertebrates were born with the nerve muscular circuits needed to solicit and execute the sex act fully formed. Male rats, for example, did not normally mate until they were 35 to 80 days old, but testosterone injection at much younger ages elicited a full range of adult behavior at those earlier ages. A low energy male with a highly receptive female. Okay. Cerebral cortex, central excitatory mechanisms of a nerve cell that received incoming information from sense receptors. Hormones acted on this central excitatory mechanism to stimulate the level of sexual excitement. They could lower the threshold needed to stimulate circuits governing the male or female behavior patterns. Third, they could directly affect the senses. He suspected that testosterone increased the tactile sensitivity of the penis. And that would provide like a positive feedback loop, where everything stimulates different parts of this circuit and pushing towards the sex act.
One of the interesting things that she goes over, both in the sex hormones and in the rodent's tail and in the brain one, is this notion of being able to tell differences via observing differences in brain structures or nervous systems, or attributing any of these things to like a stable formula, where because it's important to remember that all these things are alive and in motion and are not determined outside of, I mean, you can't study something without that thing being alive and having to be existing in the world. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into biological differences, right? So even if you can measure something like a biological difference between a male or female structure, you're always doing that on the basis that they've already been separated socially, and that they are going to change over time necessarily.
Another debate that they're going to go over is whether or not feminine and masculine sexual behavior is mutually exclusive, or like whether one behavior suppresses the other. It turns out that they're
section
not.
was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. That, for example, if you have a very receptive female who's like, they've observed cases where she's like lordosis, and the male won't mount her. So then she like gets frustrated and then mounts him.
Hashtag girl boss.
Yeah. So it turns out that the inherent bisexuality is a little more accurate. There's also the
Freud was right.
various.
Different kind of bisexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah, here it's having capacity for multiple different sexual behaviors and structures. As we know from for example, like hormonal interventions in trans people.
Wait, how so?
Well, that you can dramatically change, like, these things are not as set in stone as like a binary. That you can change the way that something is functioning, that it doesn't have like an inbuilt biological thing that gets set in utero, right?
Mm-hmm.
That bodies respond to the hormones and signals that they are inputting and circulating.
Yeah.
Regardless of prior states, or taking into account, but not exclusively from prior states, right? So if you have hormone exposure in the womb that masculinizes your body, and you take hormones that, like, quote unquote feminize your body, you haven't, like, generally speaking, they aren't like innately incompatible, right?
Yeah.
You haven't closed off the possibility of new interactions from different hormones, different signals. Shall we finish off with gender systems?
Yes. Okay. Like the first chapter, Gender Systems Towards a Theory of Human Sexuality begins with an anecdote. This time of Fausto-Sterling's childhood. She was a bit tomboyish as a child, and some people might say that this was her inclination. This reflects her inclination to become a scientist later in life. In this book, I've shown how medical and scientific knowledge about anatomy and physiology acquires gender. I started at the outside, with genital gender, and moved inward, from the brain to body chemistry and ultimately to something quite intangible: behavior. It turns out, however, that we cannot understand the underlying physiology of behavior without considering an animal's social history and contemporary environment. True to the image of the Mobius strip, when we reached a level of analysis that involves chemistry, and by implication genes, that is, when we were at the most interior moments of our journey, we had suddenly to consider the most exterior effects. What was the animal's social history? What was the architecture of the test apparatus? Why did scientific genetic strains respond to hormone stimuli only under certain conditions? And while the driving question on the exterior surface of the Mobius strip is, how does knowledge about the body acquire gender, the active question on the inside surface is, how do gender and sexuality become somatic facts? How, in other words, does the social become material? Answering this inside question would require a book-length essay, so in the concluding chapter I offer but a framework for future research.
Yeah. In the next section, in the next part of this section, she goes into the idea of like genes as this blueprint is the common way that things are thought and talked about in the scientific world. That actually, as Richard mentioned, genes are always in an environment. There's no separation. You have to be considering both at all times.
Mm-hmm. Like, genes on their own don't do anything. They're inert.
Right.
Yeah, so here's a good model we agreed on how to view like the inside and the outside of the body. This is not an optical illusion. What is it? What do we call it? Something of that's similar. You look at the birds, or you can focus on the fishes and keep the birds as the background, but overall they produce a continuous image. And if you to see the whole image, you see both the fish and the birds. And similarly, we should be looking at sex in a similar way, where the environment and the chemistry are not entirely separate from each other. They form together a complete image.
I would also offer this duck rabbit. I put it inside chat if you want to show on screen.
Mm-hmm. I think people know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's if you search duck rabbit, you'll come up with the drawing. But it's basically a drawing that that shows, depending on how you look at it, a duck and a rabbit. And it's this idea of there being one continuous thing that you can consider in different ways. And each one of them is an incomplete analysis. It's what we have from a human point of view, but it's always an incomplete analysis. That you can't have one without the other, because they're actually the same thing, just considered in different ways. Funnily enough, this is actually deeply Spinozist. Some of these thinkers, I don't know how explicitly they were inspired by Spinoza, but yeah, it's a very interesting parallel to Spinoza's thought about the attributes.
Probably not directly, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm actually completely unsure.
Yes. The next thing that Fausto-Sterling will critique is the idea that sex and gender and sexuality are stable throughout life.
Well, wait. Before we move on, just real quick. Latour was influenced by Deleuze, who was influenced by Spinoza, and Fausto-Sterling was influenced by...
But Haraway.
She cites Haraway. Yeah, she cites Haraway, who was heavily influenced by Latour. Does she not cite... No, she does cite Latour. A couple times.
Oh, you found him in the footnotes?
Yeah, here. Not just the footnotes. I don't think. Wait, let's see. Yeah, she cites him a lot in the footnotes, actually. I'm seeing like 20 matches or something. 15 matches.
That must be more than Butler.
Let's see if there's any... Oh yeah, it's just in footnotes, it looks like. But yeah, so Latour is influenced by Deleuze, who's influenced by Spinoza. So, in that sense, I think it's relevant. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. As I was saying, one thing that's relevant here is that both the environment and what we see as quote-unquote like innate or stable, like your genes, your genetic environment, your cellular environment, and your social environment all change over time as you develop, and as the world around you changes, as your diet changes, as your behavior changes, and reinforces both changes in your body and changes in your external world. This supports the notion of sexuality as something fluid, and like, why shouldn't we be able to have different gender, different sexuality at different points in our lives if other factors about our body that we would consider as stable can change, such as like like your capacity for memory, for example. What next? Oh, I actually have some... No, I don't. No tabs in the end of the book. Yes, then she gets into Russian dolls. Yeah. She has a metaphor of various levels of emergence as different sized matryoshkas. Basically, the smallest level of the organism, the organelle or the cell, is the smallest, and then we go to the next level, which will be tissue, organism, or like organ system. Psyche, person-to-person relationships, culture, and then like overall history. And she talked about all of these levels a little bit throughout the book and how they will affect sex.
Right. It's important to note this analogy is a little bit clunky, but the important part for her is that because all of the dolls are nested, they necessarily have to fit together. And so if you change one, you must, that there's necessarily a change in how all of the dolls fit together and how all of the dolls are shaped. Like you have to think of the dolls as sort of fluidly shaped. And so a change in the shape of one produces changes in the shapes of all of the others.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the way that she's going about talking about systems theory.
Yes.
It's a bit clunky, but it works okay for her purposes.
Using Russian nesting dolls as a framework suggests that history, culture, relationships, psyche, organism, cell are each appropriate locations from which to study the formation and meanings of sexuality and gender. Developmental systems theory, whether applied to the assembly doll or to its subunits, provides the scaffolding for thought and experiment. Assembling the smaller dolls into a single large one requires the integration of knowledge derived from very different levels of biological and social organization. The cell, the individual, groups of individuals organized in families, peer groups, cultures, and nations and their histories all provide sources of knowledge about human sexuality. We cannot understand it well unless we consider all of these components. To accomplish such a task, scholars would do well to work in interdisciplinary groups. And while it is not reasonable, for example, to ask all biologists to become proficient in feminist theory, or all feminist theorists to be proficient in cell biology, it is reasonable to ask each group of scholars to understand the limitations of knowledge obtained from working within a single discipline. Only non-hierarchical, multidisciplinary teams can devise more complete, or what Sandor Harding calls less false, knowledge about human sexuality.
I think less false here is a bit of a odd choice of words, but I actually think less complete is a good way of talking about it. Than necessarily, the more ways that you're able to consider something, the more productive that is of understanding things that you couldn't before.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're considering it in new ways.
Yeah. I like this Haraway moment here as well. Biology is politics by other means.
Worth noting the quote here, I checked the footnote on this one actually.
Yeah.
It's biology, primatology is politics by other means.
Interesting. That seems interesting too, because studies in primates are always they're always like more closely linked to humans.
Right. In a way, there's almost like a soft, or there's like an implicit subject of those studies, which is humans and the impact that they have on humans, right? Mm-hmm. There's a very inlaid idea there.
Yeah, because primates are so expensive, we can only do those types of studies on them. Like, we can't do immunology studies on them because that would be wasting precious sample.
Right.
Mice
But
would
yeah,
work.
I think we can end it with this quote here. We will, I am sure, continue to fight our politics through arguments about biology. I want us never in the process to lose sight of the fact that our debates about the body's biology are always simultaneously moral, ethical, and political debates about social and political equality and the possibilities for change. Nothing less is at stake.
I think that ending is pretty epic, not gonna lie.
I agree. It's a very nice way to end.
Mm-hmm. It makes science out to be something that's more important than what I conceptualized it as.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that Latour, who a lot of this work sort of goes back to genealogically, is so interesting because he's not like critics sort of claimed that he was like lessening the impact of science because he was making it like socially determined. But I think it's actually interesting because I think he actually does what she's talking about here, which is understand the interrelated ways that it actually affects so many fields of social knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's integrating
And
science into like social issues.
right.
Yeah. Were you watching when Sunday was talking about politics of nature yesterday, was it?
I don't think so.
I was talking about this with my friend, but I had a thought completely unrelated to sexing the body. Is that okay?
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess we can't really timestamp, but anyway, I guess we're ending the discussion on sexing the body at least for now. If there's any questions, feel free to leave those in chat, and we'll try to get to those.
Oh, actually, before we move on, we should. But yes, send in your questions. We should talk about our overall like review of the book, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was good. The middle bits that got more heavy on the science felt like kind of a drag, even though I am interested in the science and especially in the scientific debate. Like, I love reading about scientific beef. But the closer we get to like the outsides of the book, the first and the last chapters, the more significant and the more clever the book felt. I also really like the structure. I feel like she has a very complete complete like array of different categories of sex that she's going over, like going over both except for genetics. She kind of missed out on that, but to be honest, genetics are like the least important determiner of sexuality. Yeah, going from like the genitals to hormones to the brain, and touching on gonads via both the genitals chapter and the hormones chapter. It's very exhaustive.
Yeah, I think it's written very approachably as well, where I don't think you need much prior knowledge to read this. I think maybe some of the first chapter may be the only things that would be like mildly difficult with like zero philosophical background at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think
but
the
other
first
than that-
chapter is the most challenging.
Yeah. But I don't think that's necessarily an issue, and I think it works perfectly. I think it works very well as something that you can just sort of pick up and read.
Yeah.
And I think, what were my favorite parts? I really liked, some of the really detailed ways that she traced, the ways that certain ideas developed in some of those middle chapters, especially the later chapters around hormones and some of the brain stuff was interesting. It dragged on a bit. Let's see what else. I thought that the conclusion had a little bit to be desired in terms of, I mean, she says herself that it's pretty incomplete, but I think it left quite a bit to be desired.
Yeah, that she can't answer the question of how external knowledge creates somatic facts.
Right.
But to be fair, we don't have much research on it because we think of the emergent properties as one way, like it's cellular mechanisms and diffusion that determines how society is structured, rather than societal structure affecting the like cellular function.
Right.
When actually it's a reciprocal relationship.
Exactly. Yeah, overall I quite liked it. But yeah, like I said, I found the ending, I think it could use a little bit more, especially if you're trying to look at it in terms of philosophy. I think it could use a little more in the ending. But overall, especially some of those chapters, I think, what is that chapter in the middle called? Sex hormones. Do sex
There's
hormones
two of
really
them.
exist?
That's chapter
Yeah.
7.
Thank you. Yeah. Do sex hormones really exist? I think it was really interesting. I like how much actual like biology she goes into. It's very
Yes.
instructive. And then the stuff on rat sex and sexual behaviors based upon hormones was really interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. I particularly liked the levels at which she explains biology. Like there are a couple of times I had to like explain the biology behind stuff, but it was just stuff that like that I wanted to share with people in reading group. It wasn't stuff that was essential to understand the piece. Or it would be stuff that she would later explain, like the fact that genes don't do anything without the presence of other molecules, such as transcription factors and enhancers and repressors and histones. She like anticipates this note and talks about it in chapter 9 briefly, just to give people a better understanding of how the limitations of genetic determination. It's probably very much her being a professor. She knows what to explain and what to not explain.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a great book, especially if anyone watching has a friend that's interested in this stuff, but relatively unlearned in more like philosophical and political traditions around feminism and critical studies of things like gender.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a great book to get for them.
Yeah. This is also a good book that argues against sex determinism. Like people who people will argue for sex determinism on both sides of the political aisle. Like they'll say vile shit like women can't vote because they are like biologically inferior in some way. Like it's always something stupid, so I can't replicate the argument. Or people will say that like trans people have the brain of their the sex that they identify with.
Yeah, there's so many issues with that. Especially like identifying, I mean, it's just bad. It's not great science in general. Like you can maybe find interesting things there, but then the thing is, the issue is going backward from the representation of a sexual, of this like clean sexual dualism of male
Yeah.
and female. Because I think
no
you
such
can
thing
probably
as a
find
male or a female brain.
right, exactly. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add, but I enjoyed recapping this, and I enjoyed reading this book.
Bob left a comment. I wish it explored more the historical material factors which determine sex, like the mode of production and how it exerts a pressure to create a false sexual dimorphism. I think that would be gender, and of course, sex and gender are like a false binary, but it's also sort of like outside the scope. Like her project is to integrate feminism with biology, right? Do you think that...
Yeah, biology and medical knowledge and neuroscience.
Yeah. Do you think that adding the historical materialism would integrate those two?
No, I think it'd be relatively speculative and at best, mostly.
Yeah. I am going to
lot of that
compare
stuff
this book later to The Second Sex, because The Second Sex, de Beauvoir talks about like what different definitions of womanhood, from scientific ones to psychoanalytic ones to ones in literature, which is what I read about so far. And those are probably going to go more into like the social factors. I think, and after I read those two, I'm going to have a very complete and complex answer for what is a woman. Yeah. Good book. Oh, also, a question that I had kind of throughout this is whether she would say much about trans people. But it seems that in chapter 1, she kind of says that she's not going to. Because...
Yeah, it's worth noting this is still a book from the 2000s, and other questions are a little bit...
No, she does
controversial.
mention, like, research on trans people.
Right.
However, she says that she believes there's a problem with the categories. I took a note on this. Where is it? Well, is it on the last page of the... No. Okay, there it is. I found it. The tenets of some connectionist theory provide interesting starting points for understanding human sexual development. Because connectionist networks, for example, are usually nonlinear, small changes can produce large effects. One implication for studying sexuality: we could easily be looking in the wrong place and on the wrong scale for aspects of the environment that shape human development. Furthermore, a single behavior may have many underlying causes, events that happen at different times in development. I suspect that our labels of homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, and transgender are really not good categories at all, and are best understood only in terms of unique developmental effects affecting particular individual. Thus, I agree with those connectionists who argue that the developmental process itself lies at the heart of knowledge acquisition. Development is a process of emergence. And this makes sense for her because, she's somebody who had heterosexual inclinations earlier in life and then developed homosexual ones later. So all in all, you could say that she was either like was a straight person who became gay, or she's a bisexual all along. But it might be more accurate to suggest that like sexuality as a whole is just fluid. Or it makes sense why she would be sympathetic to theories of sexuality that allow for more fluidity. She says this also earlier in the chapter. Okay, yeah. I think that's all I had to say. Let me double check my notes. Yeah, systems theory allows us to go beyond dualisms. Okay, that's the only note that I didn't read. Okay. We're done with sexing the body. We're gonna have the second sex reading group soon.
What date will that be taking place on?
I have no idea. It's up to Imran.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Any last things before we head off?
Don't think so.
Okay. If you're here, hopefully you subscribe and come back for more. If you have things you want to suggest to us, ping probably myself or Richard in one of the content suggestions if you think it would be a good fit for what we're going over.
Mm-hmm.
In general, we'll look at anything in the content suggestions channel as potential things to go over. And you can also donate $20 or more, and we will go over something of your choice. Sureshot says, or me. Sure, yeah.
Yes, ping Sureshot.
Yeah, everyone ping Sureshot.
Mm-hmm. Sureshot will be the arbiter. He's going to be the bouncer at the club with his arms folded.
We'll probably do another stream when?
Next
maybe
week.
Saturday?
Or Saturday, yeah, depending on if we have content.
Okay, sounds good with me. See you all later.
See you!